Professor Bardale, and we're in week 9. So this week we're going to finish up our section on capitalism and socialism. On Thursday we're going to talk a bit about healthcare, which is intertwined with these economic issues and issues of resource distribution. And then next week on Thursday we're also going to be doing review. So today we'll finish up capitalism, socialism. Thursday, healthcare, second part class review for the final. And then week 10 is going to be all honors presentations. So you honors students, I'll have to look at my roll to see how many of you are left. I think there's at least 5 of you, so I think there might even be 6. So that's 3 presentations per class, and that'll leave plenty of time for you to do your 15, and you might even get 20 minutes if we're good on time. So have your 15 minutes of fame. There'll be time for questions, dialogue, and I'll be like sitting in the peanut gallery helping you out if you need some help, or maybe and also writing some exam questions on the fly that I'll stick up. So the exam will be available week 10, an hour after class. I'm going to give myself an hour to kind of tinker with things and fine tune the exam questions on the honors presentations. So still, week 10 still attendance requirement. You get points for being here, and there will be questions on the honors presentation. Okay, so let me. Oh, if you're interested too, there's fall registration. I'm teaching an ethics class. It's Philosophy 201 if you haven't taken it. It's going to be, depending on what happens with the new administration, the new president, I should say, who's, sets the agenda for the administration. Given the current administration's decisions, it's just going to be ethics and critical thinking, and that's it in perpetuity for philosophy. So hopefully there'll be a change in attitude with the new administration starting in July. So I'm hoping for that. If not, I'll be doing critical thinking. So in any event, I'll be doing ethics in the summer term, and then it'll be critical thinking and ethics again in the fall, and critical thinking and ethics again in the winter, and critical thinking again, just critical thinking in the spring because it's a smaller term. So, yeah.
Do you know if those are going to be in-class classes or only online?
There'll be one in class and one online. So there'll be one here in the studio. And it's going to be a small class size too. It's so you register now. There's going to be 15 seats in the studio here, and then 15 online if you want to take it as an online class with the video. And that's kind of going to be the format. There'll be an online class, and there'll be one with a regular section here, and then a small online section. Also, the philosophy club's still around, so if you're interested in that, there's a couple of students who are interested in doing something over the summer, and since I'll be here, I might be able to facilitate that. Definitely coming back big in the fall. So you can go to OrgSync, and I'll post a link to that for OrgSync. You can sign up and get updates. All right, let's come back to topic at hand. Oops, let me get to my... All right. And I'll have week 10 up shortly. I'm just going to put honors presentations. And honor students, I was going to send you a message out. I'll do that also, but I'll tell you in class here for those of you who I think most of you are here. So I'd like to have a draft of your paper sometime before your presentation. So the papers are due. I remember when I had them due, if I had a due date in Moodle. Let me just look here for a moment. I have last year's due date here. Let's see what it says. Doesn't say. I think it's in the syllabus. Does anybody remember offhand? I should know these things, but let's see. Honors. Anyway, I'd like to see your papers. Let's say sometime this weekend, just send me, email me a draft. Let's see. So this is what you should do when you have questions that you're not sure about and you think might be in the syllabus. Saves me time. Here. Form posts. I was sure I had it on here. Well, this is probably not the best use of our time. So, so anyway, I'd like to see a draft of your paper this weekend, and this will ensure that you're like ready in class on Tuesday. So better you're scrambling to put it together this weekend than you're scrambling to put it together the night before class and are woefully unprepared. Okay, come down here, and actually I need to see something that's hidden, so I'm going to go back to my cacophonous view here. So we're going to go through, I got a PowerPoint here, and we'll go through some of the readings, hit the highlights. But by the way, for honor students, here's the link to upload your papers. It says upload here. All right. 6. Make sure I got the right one. Actually, I'm going to do something else here. Had a good Memorial Day weekend. Anybody do anything fun? Or something have to do with Memorial Day? Maybe not, and more somber. Mostly it seems like people barbecue. Waffle. I'll make sure I have the most up-to-date one. I keep on having to change like bits on it, like the, let's see. Yeah, I changed this to part 1 and part 2. Well, actually, let's do both. Wrong button. Okay. So one question maybe to start out with, before even talking about socialism and capitalism, is why are these contemporary moral issues? Like what does economics have to do with morality? Start out with that.
Standpoints on morality, basic moral issues, kind of seems like.
Like you hear about like, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
No, it's good. That was actually the end of it.
Yeah, it seems like when people make economic arguments, they often couch them in terms of what? What are like some buzzwords that you hear in debates about economics? Catchphrases. I'm just thinking there's like a million of them. Some are in our some of them are in our college mission statements and stuff. Equality, yeah, there's one. There's a good moral. This is some of the stuff we talked about at the beginning of the term, right? Equality. Equality is, I suppose you could say is it a descriptive word when people talk about income equality, for example? It's a big thing, right? You've heard that phrase, income equality. It's obviously not descriptive, right? It doesn't. People don't make the same amount of money. Maybe, and even in the most socialist countries, you know, everyone's not equally poor either. It's just, most people are poor, and there's a few people that are leading the revolution that basically live like nobility, and everybody else picks up the scraps. Equality, when people talk about income equality, they're not being descriptive. So what's the other alternative? They're being prescriptive, or they're talking about how things should be. It should be that things are more equal. And their idea that things would be better if they were more equal. I'm not so sure about that. I'm not sure that equality is necessarily a good thing, because it seems to me that inequality is the natural consequence of freedom. So if you have an open society and you have the ability to achieve, some people are going to get lucky, some people are going to have skills, talents, and abilities, some people are going to work their ass off, some people are going to be unlucky, right? But people are free to fail and succeed. Yeah.
I think socialism does have some points that we need to put in, but we need to do a mix of the two, and not the whole thing. Because if you do a communist, pure communism, if it worked directly as it did on paper, it would equal equality, but since we're human, it's not going to be that way. It's going to be some people are going to really, really big power and others wrong, I feel like.
Yeah, and often I hear that as an argument. It's Strucker's view. I agree with like the first part that he said the socialism doesn't work, but I don't think that's the only reason against it. I think you make a moral argument against it too. So I have a friend who's actually he's a socialist entrepreneur, and he says that same thing that you say. This guy, he's a consultant, so he makes money off of actually people like me. we're good friends. We go back and forth on this about, again, who's the bigger paradox, the libertarian college professor working for the state of Oregon, working for the government at a community college, or the socialist entrepreneur who wants to live in like a communist state, but he says, oh, but human beings are so self-interested. And so, he has this lofty moral idea of complete total socialism, but he says, yeah, but, concession to reality, we gotta live in this crappy capitalist society as he sees it. Well, a society that he benefits from greatly and provides him a wonderful standard of living. And when it comes to him and his, he's trying to, get every penny he can out of the system and make as much money as he can. But his idea for society is this kind of big socialist paradise, which can never be, but to which we can only aspire. Right. So that. So I mean that's. But I think from a moral standpoint, you could make an argument that be able to keep what you earn, be able to give it away to who you want, as long as it's not in the sort of cronyistic system where people start out of the gate with a huge amount of privilege. Maybe that seems like it might be better than a kind of a state enforced equality where if someone achieves a great deal, they can only make so much. And how much do you get to keep? Well, as much as you need. Who decides what you need? Well, everybody else that wants your stuff, right? People who are jealous, people who are screw-ups, people who can't take care of themselves, right? People that get unlucky and are, and see you as a person who have achieved something as just one of the winners of life's lottery, to quote Dick Gebhardt, former congressman. He referred to the rich as the winners of life's lottery, as if it was just kind of a fluke that somebody, was able to make a lot of money. Anyway, why are they moral issues? There's a lot of like moral dimensions to like ideas like personal responsibility, individual freedom, and even commercial acts. I like to say that I believe in free consenting. I gotta say it the right way. Commercial acts between consenting adults, right? That a buyer and a seller should be able to have an exchange, and you shouldn't have a government bureaucrat with his hand out or with his rule book, or telling the employer how much he has to charge for his goods, telling the worker how much he gets for his labor. It ought to be a fair exchange back and forth, and there ought to be free and open competition. in a situation like that, it seems like the employee has to be the best they can be to get the best job. The seller has to provide the best product with the best quality at the lowest price. Because if he doesn't, he's going to be undercut by this other guy that's trying to do the same thing. And if you're not the best you can be as an employee, applying for a job, somebody else is going to get that job. So it's just all about this market competition. Let's talk a bit about what these terms mean. Let's say one thing about. Let's see. Let me come back to this for a minute. So to recap, why are economic issues moral issues? Because they deal with issues like personal responsibility, individual liberty, with a distribution of scarce resources, and there's phrases like social justice, right? Social justice is a take on justice. Maybe later on I'll ask the question about whether social justice and just plain justice are concepts which are in conflict with one another. Rights, right? Property rights. Property rights is a form of a right. Moral oppression. If people are being manipulated or oppressed or abused, or what's the word? Exploited, right? Exploitation. That's a moral description, right? What's the difference between exploitation and cooperation? That's a good question too. Issues of privilege, power, and difference, right? Coming right out of our college mission statement. All those are moral issues, and you're not talking about the supply-demand curve. You're not talking about monetary policy or something. You're talking about people being able to earn a living wage. You're talking about people having protection against exploitation from unscrupulous characters. Like all those things are things that come up in talking about these issues, economic issues. Having a contract violated, for example, or having the right to work at whatever, or not to join a union, or the right to collective bargaining, right? So there's lots of issues, or lots of moral issues and legal issues which are undergirded by moral principles that come up when we talk about economics. So. My cell phone's gone off too. Don't worry about it. Okay, so one thing about socialism is you shouldn't confuse socialism with charity. And I hear this, people that can be broadly construed as on the left, often conflate society with government, right? So they'll say anyone who isn't a socialist is greedy, or that they don't care about the poor, or that they're just selfish, right? So and people that think in these terms, they think about government as being this sort of cornucopia that kind of gives out of the bounty of society to those less deserving, takes care of people and so on, and that's. Government is only one way that people get help who are down and out. Another way is like getting a job, right, by some greedy capitalist. And most people, if you ask them, well, would you rather be making a pittance on the dole or have a good paying job? They say, well, I'd rather have a job, right? So private industry, or just businesses, let's say, they provide for people. Charity provides for people. So there's charities that where people just give money. Sometimes there's strings attached, sometimes there isn't. Sometimes to get a shave, shower, and a good meal, you got to listen to a sermon. Sometimes they just give you a warm bed and a cot and say, God bless you, brother. Sometimes there are secular charities that take care of poor people. Around here in Lane County, there's lots of charities that feed hungry people. Now, some of them get government money and are partially funded by the government. I think the local Eugene Mission, I don't know that they get government money. Catholic Charities, Food for Lane County, I think they get some government money. Homeless shelters, right? All these people working out of the goodness of their heart to try to help people, maybe with some government assistance, but primarily they're private charitable foundations that are helping people not, they're helping people with money that's just voluntarily given. And I think if you conflating government with society is to miss the essential difference between coercion and coercive giving in the form of taxes and voluntary giving in the form of charitable contributions. So in socialism, there is no private industry, and the state owns and controls the means of production. Now, there's different ideas about this. Karl Marx talks about socialism being an intermediate step between capitalism and a completely stateless society. And so for Marx, the big worry is that after the workers' revolution, after people seize the means of production, meaning factories and farms, in Marx's day, today, every productive business, the workers seize the means of production, then he was worried that the factory owners, the business owners, and their allies would have a counter-revolution and take the means of production back. And so to prevent that, you need a big totalitarian state to safeguard the revolution, right? And what happens when you do that? Well, it's meet the new boss, same as the old boss, right? The guardians of a revolution become the new aristocracy, and so you get you had the Tsar before, who might have been kind of a bastard and led this huge bureaucratic society, and you got a lot of poor peasants working the land and just getting by, and so then you have this revolution, and then you got Lenin and Stalin, who are like the Tsar in that they're sort of hoarding all the wealth, and they're also putting people in gulags and starving people for political purposes and doing all kinds of horrible things. So anyway, but in Marx's theory, the state owns all the factories, and it has this kind of idea. This idea that eventually what you're headed towards is a series of decentralized worker cooperatives. So you kick out the capitalists, where the means of production, again, factories and farms are in private hands, or people own them basically, right? So you take these things and then you give them over to the workers. So you got like a plant where you're making widgets, right? And you're some line worker and you work long hours for low pay, and it's repetitive, monotonous work. And you say, well, I could run this factory, right? So then you get together with all your buddies and you grab the torches and pitchforks and you storm the castle, and through either force of violence or just through coercion and threats of violence, sometimes through peaceful change. And Marx actually said he didn't really care which. He was open to violence, but he was also said, well, peaceful means might work in some situations. But basically, you steal the factories and the farms from the capitalists, and you're going to run them yourself. All the workers are going to take over the plant, and everybody's going to take turns, and everybody's going to be treated equally. Everybody's going to make the same wage. And that's sort of this idea that Marx has for the workers' revolution. And he really thought it was a moral offense that you could have people that could just pile up huge loads of cash and assets and land and businesses, while other people just eked out a living as what people today might say are wage slaves, right? So he thought that was a horrible system. And again, income inequality to him was the big problem. And so the way you solve this problem is by deposing all the owners of businesses, the captains of industry, steal all this stuff and give it away to the workers. And they can collectively own it, like Weimart. Weimart didn't steal their stuff; they started themselves. Or there's this great theater called the Red Vic. They had a hotel. I don't know if they're running it anymore. It's in the Haight-Ashbury district in San Francisco, and it's like a worker-owned theater cooperative. And they show foreign films, and they have these. I like their setup. They have these benches. I think they're pews from a church that closed up, And so it's, and they have this popcorn where you get your brewer's yeast instead of butter if you're a vegan. So it's kind of a cool place, and it's all owned by the workers. And people take turns doing things, and there's a board that runs it. And Marx has this idea that you could just run everything like that. It would all be workers' cooperatives. There'd be no boss really. There might be people who kind of rise to the ranks and learn how to do things, but there would be no sort of idea of a central authority. It would all be, there'd be no government, there'd be no coercion, and people would cooperate and work together in this workers' paradise. Unfortunately, every place that's tried this is completely fizzled, with various disastrous consequences. Currently, we're seeing the revolution working out in Venezuela, which I was joking about last time. I suppose I kind of like the gallows humor, but it is pretty sad when you have people starving to death in a country that's sitting on vast natural resources and a mountain of oil and other things, and people can't even get enough to eat. So I don't want to make light of it, but some people have this idea that they think about socialism, they think about Europe, but Europe is really more of a mixed economy and sitting on the laurels of centuries of capitalist production. So their turn to socialism is a recent thing, and it takes a long time for decline to happen. They're also able to borrow lots and lots of money, and so I have a little funny video on the sovereign debt crisis. So they're basically running their society on borrowed money, and I would say it's only it's only a matter of time before it collapses on its own weight. And again, what do they do when it starts to collapse on its own weight? Well, they make a few little market reforms here and there and sort of make it not quite as crappy, and you kick the can down the road. And so what's the solution? They have to socialist system imploding on itself where everyone's trying to live at the expense of everyone else. It's just, a little more capitalism mixed in the system to just keep it limping along. So the intermediate step between capitalism and the stateless society that Marx wanted, although, the pure communism or stateless society, it's not really, okay, I would say like this Marx's idea of a stateless society, I would say you have a state by any other name. So it's not really anarchy. You have this loosely knit system of worker cooperatives. It's not like you could say, well, I'm going to start my own cooperative and I'm going to keep all the money for myself and I'll make a deal with you. You work for my business, I run the business, I'm going to pay you this amount. That would be illegal under Marx's system. Or not, I don't know are there going to be laws? I don't know what Marx would say about that. But I think what would happen is like an angry mob would say you're a capitalist counter-revolutionary, you'd be put in a gulag. So so the idea, it's enforced equality, and you don't have the right to start your own business, you don't have the right to make a bunch of money, you don't have a right to have a bigger house than anybody else, so you're constrained by what everybody else makes. And so what you end up with typically is this is an old Russian joke. Everyone works for the government, and the government pretends to pay them, right? So basically, oh, sorry, I got that wrong. People pretend to work for the government, and the government pretends to pay them, right? So you don't have that personal incentive to make something of yourself, to provide for you and your family, to advance socially, to build up skills, talents, and abilities. If there's no reward there, the profit motive, both for individuals and businesses, you end up with pretty anemic production and usually a dysfunctional society. So the rhetoric in communism, it's all about the worker, right? So it's Marxism is a trade unionist thing. So a union is a voluntary association of workers, sometimes involuntary. Sometimes if you don't join up, you get beat up behind the shop. But it's a workers' cooperative or association, and the idea is that the workers all band together and make demands on the factory owner, saying we want a certain wage, we want certain working conditions. And to be fair, unions were a reaction to the difficult and often inhumane and dangerous conditions in factories early on in the Industrial Revolution. You have child labor, you have people being caught in machinery, you have, there's no workplace safety laws or regulations. And factory owners ran the gamut. Some were conscientious and wanted to treat their workers well and pay their workers well. And you know, some weren't so conscientious, right? And when the revolution was in full swing, the you know, competition, it really wasn't working quite right. And so, and you might say this is social growing pains. And so things were bad, and so you get people banding together saying we're gonna protest for our rights and we wanna be treated a certain way. And if you, and what's gonna happen if the factory owner doesn't do what they say? What's the union gonna do? Well, besides the workers' revolution, that's like the last thing.
They strike.
Yeah, you can strike, yeah. So you got all the factory owner and or the farmer needs people to run the factory, to pick his crops. And there's, even short of a strike, you can do other things. So you can do what they call like a slowdown. Or sometimes there's this phrase, work to rule. So you just basically do the minimum you have to do to avoid being fired. So you don't really try, you pretend you're in a socialist society actually. You just do whatever you have to do to get by. So you work to rule, and you can do a slowdown where you're intentionally gumming up the works and going extra slow. And you're all working together, and the factory owner finally cries uncle and then gives you a contract. And you know, without a contract, you're just an at-will, you know, employee. It's just, you know, it's like having it's like having a faculty contract at Lane. You'd just be gone tomorrow. They just say, oh, budget cuts. So with you know, unions provide a lot of rights for workers, and it led to workers being treated better. And so out of this movement came this idea, well, the workers ought to be supreme instead of just, you know, this collective bargaining thing and, you know, having the kind of a grudging truce with the factory owner. Let's get rid of the factory owner. Let's kill him or put him in prison or kill him and his family, and let's have like another French Revolution, right? Let's get rid of the nobility, get rid of Marx called them the bourgeoisie, which are basically the owners of the means of production. It's a French word. And so you take the capitalist class, or the people that unfairly benefit off of the labor of their workers, and you depose them, maybe kill them out of revenge, right? And then you take over. And you look at communist revolutions throughout the world, and that's usually what they did. They, in China, one of the things that Mao did is that, you know, his goons came in, they killed all the people that ran the farms, and then they you know, forcibly moved people from the cities out to the country, and they told them work the land. And nobody knew what the hell they were doing. And so, you know, you got, like, people that run things, you know, generally know what they're doing and have experience. You take your average worker who might think he knows everything, and you put him in charge of a big plant, and you're likely going to have problems, right? So you have massive starvation, millions and millions of people dying through you know, basically incompetence of people not knowing how to run a business. And this has happened predictably, you know, all around the world. You know, Stalin starved people in Ukraine on purpose. But you had the same thing happen in Zimbabwe when they had a socialist revolution there, and they took all the land from largely white landowners, you know, redistributed to the people, and all of a sudden Zimbabwe went from a net exporter of food to people starving to death. And, you know, similar thing in Venezuela. So, but the rhetoric for the socialism, it's all about the worker, and it's all about the people, right? So today, like, China's called the People's Republic of China, right? So, and even though it's ruled by a small, you know, group of elites that are part of the Communist Party, it's still called the People's Republic, right? And this idea it's for the people. And so when you read, you know, the writings of Marx and other socialists, is all about the worker, the farmer, the blue collar worker, the factory worker, the tradesman, and it's all about the people. Comments or questions so far? Yeah.
So statesless, doesn't that mean that it's like not ruled by a governing?
Yeah. It's a stateless society.
How does anyone ever think that that would work? I mean, there's always gonna be someone who rules, no matter, like, there's always gonna be the highest power. And
See,
how
I think
does-
Marx
how does
would
it work?
disagree. And part of this, you might think Marx is being kind of naive about things.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
Yeah, what he says is the state will wither away. There'll be no need for it. And I think his idea is that really it's poverty that primarily drives crime. And if people get enough to eat, they have meaningful work, they have control over their life to a certain extent, they're not going to go out and commit crimes. And I think, you disagree?
Oh, yeah.
And this whole idea of hierarchy is I think he would say it's a social aberration, and he has this idea that that the demise of capitalism, and the rise of socialism, and the rise of a stateless society is a historical inevitability, is the phrase he used. He thought that you start out, and Marx actually did a lot of interesting work, and I think really good work on like how economic systems emerge. It's like in his in Das Kapital, he talks about this and goes back to the first division of labor, where you have agriculture is discovered. And maybe even before that, where you have the hunter-gatherer society, it's along gender roles. And then you have agriculture, and you get feudalism, basically, where you have the nobility, the aristocracy, where wealth is passed down through hereditary lines, and you have the serfs that are farming the land, serfs and slaves. And then finally, when capitalism comes about, you have this new, the factory owner, the merchant, and then you have the workers under him. So you start to get factory production, and then you get the factory owner, and they actually depose the nobility as far as power goes. They become the dominant force. And now, and so the king ends up losing his power, the church also, both end up losing their power to the business class. And so they're sort of the next empire to rise. And then he thinks after that, you'll get this socialist state, and it'll be the day of the worker. And the workers will have all the power. And then finally, this last phase, the state, this sort of temporary thing that's set up to keep down the capitalist pigs, will eventually wither away. Capitalism will have breathed its last breath, and we'll all live in a worker's paradise. That's kind of his that's the way he sees history going. So now Marx thinks that you can kind of push it along and make these things happen faster. But he sees these as emerging from the material conditions of society, and how things would naturally go once you discover how to do certain things. You can kind of see this material conditions thing about like division of labor. It becomes really important when you learn how to do certain things, and it's necessary for things like mass agriculture, or certainly for industrial society, it's important. All right, so that's Marx. Marx is, a mixed bag. Some people love him, some people hate him, but it's not like this guy. Nobody likes this guy.
Yeah.
The question is, how's this guy different than Marx? And this guy over here, anybody know who that is? The guy with the Mussolini, right? Yeah. So there's Hitler and Mussolini. They were both fascists. So the fascism comes from this Italian word that fasci just means like workers' cooperative or union, a trade union. So again, it's the same sort of idea of workers running the show and controlling society. So here, though, it's the state controls the means of production, and so rather than get rid of the business owners, Mussolini was a big efficiency guy. So his idea is basically the business owners become vassals of the state doing its bidding, and the worker, so they retain nominal ownership, but it's heavily regulated, and they work, hand in glove with the state. So some of this is called corporatism or private-public partnership, to use the phrases often used today. It's the same idea. Or you might call it crony capitalism. You might call it crony socialism. That might be more accurate. So businesses are given some independence, but the whole show is run by the state, so it's a centrally planned economy. And the idea, again, is that the rhetoric here is about sort of the fatherland or progress. And you get a lot of sort of, you read like the early Nazi propaganda, and it's about, getting the 1%, the Jews, who were, very prosperous and ran a lot of businesses and banks and some other things, and were disproportionately wealthy because of their traditions of education and hard work. Jews traditionally have been in the banking industry because of this kind of weird thing with, like in Christian Europe, there's this thing called usury, which means you can't charge people interest. It was seen as a sin. There's actually a prohibition in the Old Testament against charging somebody interest on a loan. So you can see how not being able to get a loan is going to hobble your economy, right? That's going to make things hard. So what do? Well, the Jews have this interpretation of the Old Testament saying, well, you look at what it says. It just says you can't charge your brother interest. Doesn't it say anything about the Gentiles, right? So they would make loans to Gentiles, and they, fueled the Renaissance. And this is this is why you have lots of Jewish people in the banking industry today, and why you get these crazy conspiracies about Jewish bankers. So, so in Germany at the time, you had all these lots of wealthy Jewish businessmen, and Germans sort of anti-immigrant sentiment, anti-Semitism, and this idea they're the 1%. They're those rich, greedy bastards that are keeping the worker down. And so part of it's not like Hitler just, had in for Jews. Hitler had in for rich people, and lots of Jews happened to be rich. And there's also some other, religious bigotry and so on. And Hitler was sort of all over the map. I think he was probably he was into some weird mystical stuff, but also he was kind of a skeptic. He certainly wasn't a Christian, and Christians, and particularly Catholics, were on his radar screen. A lot of them were put in the concentration camps, along with the Jews and Jehovah's Witnesses and lots of other people. But anyway, Hitler was all about the worker and the workers' revolution. The only difference between the fascists in Germany and the communists in Germany, and they used to fight each other all the time. It's about whether the workers' revolution was a German workers' revolution or whether it had to be a worldwide revolution. So the idea is it just, the German people and the fatherland and the German workers? So what does Nazi stand for? Anybody know what Nazi? Let's have it on there. Oh, here it is. National Socialist German Workers' Party, right? So it's a German Workers' Party. It's not a worldwide revolution of the communists. And so really it's potato, right? Now people often, they think about, communism's left-wing and fascism's right-wing, but it's pretty much the same thing. And it's this idea of that capitalism is bad, the factory owners and landowners and people that own farms and people of wealth and stature got their wealth through illegitimate means, and we're going to get a mob together and steal the stuff back from them that they unrightfully took from us, society, and then we're going to dole it out to people, redistribution of income. And the fascists were a little more rigid about, I think, the idea of rules. So Hitler's kind of an authoritarian, same thing with Mussolini. Marx a little less so. Although I think if you compare like communist Russia or the Soviet bloc states like East Germany with like living in Hitler's Germany, probably about the same experience, I would guess. Maybe even worse under the communists, right? You're going to be, I don't know, I have to do a study of it. But the whole idea of people ratting out their friends and spying on each other and this kind of these authoritarian rules and running a society on fear, and punishment. Let's see. So Nazi stood for National Socialist German Worker Party, and both these ideas is that the state needs to control the economy, and they're both forms of collectivism, which is, I'd say, like the idea of mob rule with a smiley face. The idea that we're all going to take over society. We're going to seize the means of production and give it out to the average Joe, so the average Joe can have a piece of the pie, because he's been screwed over. So you can see how a lot of these both these guys rose to power based on class envy, people that feel disenfranchised. Germany was in pretty dire straits after punitive measures from World War I. There was a treaty that really crushed the German economy. There were payments they had to make of restitution to the other countries. I think there were some punitive trade embargoes. There were lots of conditions in the Versailles Treaty that really hurt the German economy. So you had people who were living in dire poverty and were looking for a way out. And so you have like a strong military man who's, I don't know, Hitler wasn't, he was just a minor officer, but you get a guy who at least is preaching this idea of the rise of Germany, making Germany a world economic power, and preaching military force and national pride, and we're the 99%, right? That kind of stuff. People find that attractive. And Hitler was democratically elected, right? So I don't think that Hitler sort of took over without an election. The majority of people voted for Hitler. Stalin and Lenin were maybe a little less. Their revolution was a little more violent, a little more coercive. But Hitler, rose to power, and amongst highly educated, cultured society. I think. Let me just leave with this. So most people think of it in terms of left-wing socialism or right-wing fascism, but these are both just forms of collectivism. So the idea is here's where we should be. So this us is us, not the U.S. And the Goldilocks fallacy is a thing in logic where you say that to solve any problem, you identify the two extremes and you stake out a position right in the middle, which might be good politics, but it's a lousy philosophy. And most people have this idea, just a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and you just don't be too extreme, because the worst thing to be is an extremist. So you want to be right down the middle. And some people make good arguments for it. People describe themselves as radical moderates. But I think this whole idea of left and right and being in the middle, people just have sort of vague notions of what these terms like fascism and socialism really mean historically or politically. So really, I think I would say this is the Borrowdale freedom paradigm, where you have collectivism, which is the society of kind of again mob rule with a badge and a hat. And somebody leading the mob. Socialism and fascism, both forms of collectivism, and then this idea of individualism, which is this idea of individual rights and personal responsibility or liberty. And then maybe I meant the U.S. to be the U.S. I don't know if I put it there now. I was thinking, this just means us, but I'd actually put it right over here. But I think the United States is a largely individual society, although moving more towards the collectivist side. Although maybe it's gone back a little bit, I don't know. But the idea is that you have collectivism, which is this sort of idea that your place in society only has value as much as you contribute to society. And you're to use Mussolini's terminology, you're like a cog in the machinery of state, right? So that's like the one extreme. The other extreme is you're an individual with the inherent dignity and rights, and should be able to do whatever you like. And that you don't have to prove your value to society. You have worth in and of yourself. Endowed by your creator or as just a human person, you have individual rights. And that's the spectrum where I think if you think about it, people will come down to various places where they think we should be. And I think you might say, well, we should be way over here. That's our moral ideal. But it's a more clear way of thinking about this than this left-right paradigm. All right, let's take a 10-minute break and talk some more about socialism. Okay, let's see. Let me just hit a few things and I'll get some reaction from the audience here. I talked about some of these critiques of capitalism already and like why, does socialism get a bad rap? That's the question I'm asking. So if you look at like the reason why socialism emerged, it was a reaction to some pretty horrific conditions in early industrial society, including child labor, dangerous working conditions, people being exploited, people with no skills and no power being given barely enough to live on. One thing to consider, though, is that people that moved into the cities for work in the factories saw it as preferable to their life on the farm. So if you think about the sort of big bad corporations and greedy capitalists exploiting people, they're doing it willingly. People flock to the cities because they wanted an urban existence. They wanted to buy cheap manufactured goods. They wanted to have fancy clothes, a nice watch. They wanted to go to the theater. They wanted to live in something that's more cosmopolitan than their provincial life on the farm. So people often you might think about people that streamed in the urban centers and took up factory jobs as being like your immigrants coming to America looking for a better life and working in less than ideal conditions, unskilled labor, until they're able to pick up some skills, including language skills, and integrate with society and move up the social ladder. One of the arguments for socialism is that it protects the working man from exploitation by big bad corporations, that spreads the wealth around, that wealth naturally tends to accumulate in people's hands, people pass it on to their kids, and so therefore you need to kind of spread it around. There's a famous, these political references, they're just, I feel like the years go by and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, that's the dated reference. I don't know has anybody ever heard of Joe the Plumber? One person remembers Joe the Plumber. When he was talking with President Obama and talking about all the taxes he had to pay as a small businessman. He's like a one-man operation, just running his, you could call it a plumbing business, but it's just basically this guy maybe had a helper, unplugging toilets and fixing people's faucets and stuff, right? So it's not like he's some rich guy. And he's like, you know how many taxes I have to pay? And President Obama said, well, we spread the wealth around. That's the price we pay for living in a society with social justice is I'm going to take from you, and even though you're not making that much, I got to take from you, and I got to dole out to people that I think deserve it that aren't doing as well as you. And then you think about all the public goods, public education, right? Community college, police, roads and bridges. You hear that about that a lot. Having your trash picked up, right? There was actually in early urban society, it was a huge problem. Cities were really polluted, not just by industrial smoke, but garbage piling up, sewage systems that didn't really work, infrastructure problems. And then we have things like environmental protection, right? Make sure somebody's not dumping nuclear waste in the place where you're drinking, or some kind of awful chemical that's going to give your kids birth defects or make you sick or give you lead poisoning, like the people at that the kids at that juvenile facility. I like the way I should post that story. They found out there was a problem of lead contamination, and within hours the government buildings are being scoured and tested to make sure none of the politicians are getting lead poisoning. And a few years later, they get around to looking into the juvenile detention facility, which had the same problem. So years after years of exposure, they finally got around to looking there. And that's typically how things seem to work. So the idea with socialism is that you get less of that, and you get more people treated in a more equal way. And this idea is that, libraries and parks, these are things that benefit everyone. It's not just for the chosen few. You get a social safety net in case you get sick, or in your old age, you can't work anymore, you need to be taken care of. If you don't have any family, there's the idea there's some provision for you. And the other argument they'll make is like that, well, Stalin and Mao, those are sort of extreme examples. But if you look at Europe, that's, Europe is a worker's paradise. You got free healthcare and shorter work hours, take long vacations, and people, when they're asked in surveys, they report being subjectively happier than Americans. So does socialism get a bad rap? So I think you can see why this is super attractive. I can see certainly why when people raise all these problems, they're like, yeah, something ought to be done about that. And yeah, these things are bad. And maybe things are better in Europe in some ways. So I'm going to give you some counter arguments here. Well, if you think about America as being the sort of capitalist nation, it may have been true in the 19th century, early 20th century, not so much now. And now, as far as economic freedom, America's dropped out of the top 10. We're in the top 20 still. But if you think about government spending as a percentage of gross national product, or gross domestic product now, GDP, we're not too far away from countries like France or Sweden. We spend a little more on military than those countries do. We pile up huge amounts of debt based on government programs, and most of the money goes to Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. That's over 50% of the federal budget goes to those things. You look at the state budget, most of the state budget goes to education. So this whole idea of the, so we can see when this was. I can't read the date on it. The BlackBerry president, so this is like early Obama administration, 2009, 2010. And this idea is that there are no small government conservatives anymore, and everybody's made their peace with the welfare state. It's just a matter of like what you want it to do. Do you want to give out child tax credits and subsidize religious charities like the Bush administration, or do you want to, are you more like the social justice types and you want to have more workers' protections and more money for, I'm trying to think of what qualified the Obama administration. You want to focus on race issues or think of what the focus of the Obama administration was economically. Besides breaking 2% growth, although I don't think that was on their agenda. But anyway, the idea is that Obama administration, believes in the welfare state enthusiastically, wholeheartedly. You look at Bush policies, not like a black and white difference. It's more like shades of gray. A little less socialist under the Bush administration, a little more socialist under Obama. Now things are going back to a little less socialist under Trump. Maybe some significant changes more towards the middle. But basically some form of what you'd call a mixed economy, where you have part capitalism, part socialism. So I gave you the Communist Manifesto to read. It's not too long. It's kind of boring except for the weird stuff about wife swapping. The family was a bourgeois institution, if you didn't know about that. Children should be held in common, and wives should be held in common too, according to Marx. Anyway, you look at the goals of the Communist Manifesto, and a lot of these things are like, it's like, that's America, right? So we didn't see this first one. So he wanted to get rid of this idea of holding title to property, private property. And not like, you can't own like, I should think of something you would like you can't own a house, or even like, maybe like if you have like, I don't know, Dock the hand. I got this at the thrift store. I like little bric-a-brac. So I like this. Suppose I love this little statue of this disembodied hand, some kind of bracelet. I think it's made in India or something like that. I like it. It's not like someone could say, well, that's collectively owned, and come in and take that from me and say, well, I want to have this on my mantle for a while, Borrowdale. So that when Marx is talking about private property, he's not talking about, like, there's a PSA for saving money. This guy, because he didn't save money, has to join a commune. There's this chorus of voices that says, these dungarees belong to all of us now, Tom. Right? So it's not like that. So Marx just has this idea, you can't own land. You can't own a factory. You can't have a bunch of money piled up in the bank and live off interest. Right? So the idea is everybody's going to work. Nobody owns things like land and factories, natural resources. Those belong to the people. And then you have some structure that sort of doles out things evenly. But so that's not going on in America. But look, a heavily progressive or graduated income tax. That definitely in America. And it hasn't been more graduated, yeah. So before Reagan, you'd still be paying like 70% on the top income bracket. Reagan cut to 35%. And now it's sort of hovered around there, gone down and up. I think it was around 90% and around like Roosevelt and Eisenhower. And it used to be when income tax started, it started out as like a wealth tax. And it was like just a few percentages. And it's under Woodrow Wilson gave us the income tax. And then, over the years, it keeps on jacked up until it gets to be 90% for the top bracket. And then all the other brackets kind of get pulled up with it, except for people on the very bottom that end up not paying anything. So the middle class gets soaked, the rich get soaked, and the poor don't have to pay anything. Which, is, as you can see, how that might be incentivize the growth of the welfare state and public benefits. So this abolition of all rights and inheritance. Well, we do have a huge inheritance tax, and it's the death tax. That money's already been taxed numerous times. It was taxed as wages when it was earned. It was taxed as investments if any interest was earned on it. And then they get taxed when you're dead too. So, but now we have a fairly hefty inheritance tax. Confiscation of the property of immigrants and rebels. Well, actually, there's this new thing, I think it was passed under Obama. It was like an exit tax because people are like, uh-oh, we got like socialist light in the White House and you're getting the hell out of here. And so they passed a law that said if you want to leave the country, they're going to take a big chunk of your assets and your income if you want to leave. It's like, trying to get out of East Germany or something like that. Oh, you can leave, but you got to leave some of your money here with us. So it was like an exit tax. If you wanted to leave the country and expatriate, you're like, I'm tired of... America's kind of unusual in that other countries, if you live someplace else, if you move away, they only tax... Other countries don't tax your international income. So like, if you move to Belize, if you earn money in Belize, you got to pay taxes on that. But if you got money coming in from the U.S., they don't tax that. If you got a business overseas, they don't tax that. America taxes all income wherever it's earned at the same rate. You get you get an exemption if you're living someplace else, about $100,000 or so. But everything else is taxed. So anyway, so you can see all these things are sort of extreme, but we have versions of this. I think number 2, the heavily progressive and graduated income tax, definitely have that. We have inheritance rights that the government takes a big chunk of that. And some of that, you think about, it's like a family farm, right? Or a family business. So often what happens is you get a business. It's, businesses, like if you look at all their assets, it's not hard to have a business with assets over like $5 million. That's still considered to be a small business. But you get around that size, and the government says, well, we want a big slice of that if you're going to pass it on to your heirs. And you get a business that's running like a restaurant or a chain of restaurants, and it's running on like 8% margin. That's unaffordable. And so basically you have to sell off assets or sell the whole thing in order to pay the taxes. Centralization of credit in banks of the state by means of a national bank with state capital and exclusive monopoly. What is the Federal Reserve, Alan? Right, this is the But we have a national bank, the Federal Reserve Bank of the United States, and its affiliate banks. And so we have to have that. Centralization of the means of communication in the hands of the state. Well, that hasn't happened yet, and I guess the net neutrality took a blow, so maybe not for a while. Extension of factories and instruments of production owned by the state, bring into cultivation wastelands and improvement of soil, and generally in accordance with a common plan. So state planned economy, you get some of that. You get, planning, city planning, and massive government subsidies to start businesses. Usually they go bust, like Solyndra, right? Oh, government's going to get in the green energy business. Let's give $500 million to somebody who's got some political connections, and then it all goes down the toilet. Equal obligation of all the work, establishment of industrial armies and for agriculture. Well, you had the WPA, I guess, under Roosevelt. Maybe not so much. Here's a solid dive of an anti-urban sprawl. Combination of agriculture and manufacturing. So this idea of getting rid of this idea of urban and rural, and try to make everything in between. I suppose suburbia, right? Again, maybe not so much. But let's look at number 10. Free education for all children in public schools. Public schooling is a communist idea. Doesn't mean it's a bad idea necessarily. But this idea of having government schools was a plank of the Communist Manifesto. Getting rid of child labor in its present form, so maybe you have a different form. And then this idea of vocational training. So it's not like they're all bad ideas. So if you look at the Communist Manifesto, there are certain things that have been embraced by America, and largely through the Roosevelt administration, which had a lot of socialist leanings. And basically, if you look in the history of the United States, it's the Woodrow Wilson administration, and then in big time with the Roosevelt administration, and then with the Johnson administration, Lyndon B. Johnson. Those three administrations kept on pushing America more towards the socialist direction. So we have a heavily progressive income tax, we have a big inheritance tax, we have a central bank, we have government schools. So those are four planks of the Communist Manifesto that we have to some large degree. And an exit tax, we got that too. So it's not confiscation, it's just that we get a slice if you want to leave. So here's a pro-socialism poster, and here it says, you probably can't read this, brotherhood, happiness, development, order, justice. Who could disagree with those things, right? And then you see capitalism down here with all the smog and the factories and the mire. And so here's the socialism. You see the shining city on the hill with the Greek columns and stuff like that. And then here down at the bottom, oops, in the mire, you see poverty, vice, hatred, disease, ignorance, and injustice. All the fruits of capitalism. So which one would you pick? Socialism, too, this is a bit about terminology, has a lot of different labels. Sometimes progressivism, I think, is probably a sister term, and progress towards what? Well, socialism. Progressivism is probably synonymous with socialism politically. Liberalism is kind of become a dirty word now. It's kind of, I think progressive means today what liberal used to mean. Progressive might mean like more extreme liberal or something. So if you look at these, all basically describe this idea of a big government that puts a strict control on industry, heavily regulates it, heavily taxes it, and provides lots of goods and services to people. So you get the left wing of the Democratic Party. So you have which largely dominates. Although with this last primary, the party's establishment are worried about scaring away voters. So this is why the not one but two heads of the Democratic National Committee engaged say a conspiracy to screw Bernie Sanders out of the nomination. So you had Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who was like scheming ways to try to marginalize Bernie Sanders so he wouldn't get primary votes. And then you had Donna Brazile replaced Schultz when she got the outs because of that. And then she's feeding debate questions to Hillary for the primaries, right? So Bernie Sanders is an independent socialist. He caucused with the Democrats, meaning he sort of cooperated with them in legislation, but he wasn't a member of the Democrat Party until he ran with them. But 70 members of the Democratic Party are part of this group called Democratic Socialists of America. So it's not, so if you say, oh, you're a socialist, it's not like that's an insult. I mean, it's descriptive of a person who's a liberal Democrat or left-wing Democrat. If you look at ratings for people, I'm not sure where Hillary would fall. I know they did there's a nonpartisan group that does a rating of how liberal people are in the Senate, and the most liberal person in the Senate was Barack Obama. Number 3 was Joe Biden as vice president. So and if you look at the leadership of the party, they tend to be people who are more on the left side of the aisle. So what are the goals of Democratic Socialists of America? Dignified work. Again, you look at these phrases, you're like, who could agree with that? And I believe in undignified work. Like, I think everybody should be a prostitute or a politician, but I repeat myself, or a lawyer, or work in humiliating and degrading working conditions, right? So, environmental justice, this idea of having a clean environment, economic redistribution, right? So spread the wealth around. Democratic participation. Again, it's not all bad, right? Depending on what that cashes out to be. Community empowerment. Well, I want communities to be disempowered. So, what does that mean? Well, it might mean, I don't know, like storming a bank and demanding that they make bad loans to people in your community with bad credit and no job. Otherwise, they're racist, which is what happened in the housing crisis. So, I mean, the community empowerment can mean a lot of different things, and sometimes it can have some bad effects. Global nonviolence, is anti-war, and social justice, which I think it's cashed out in terms of the economic redistribution, a big part of that. Maybe there's some other things involved in that, but typically social justice is focused on economic things. It might be focused on some other things like racial equality or equality for immigrants, things like that. So again, this is 70 of your, and this is from a couple of years ago, so those numbers might be even higher now. So 70 members of the Democratic Party out of the, I don't know how many they got left. How many Democrats are left in the House of Representatives? They lose them every term. There's, I'll have to look at the number now, 100 something. You have like, it used to be pretty split pretty evenly, about 212 each or something like that. I'll have to look. So what are some arguments against socialism? Well, I think you can break it down to moral issues, legal issues, and empirical issues. These are the three issues that we talk about in this class. I saved the empirical for last. The moral issues, and this is contemporary moral issues, so I want to kind of focus in on these. So one thing to consider, taxes are not voluntary. So sometimes this is put in terms of pointing out the gun in the room, right? It's kind of sneaky because the government colludes with your employer to skim off the top of your paycheck. And if you look at your pay stub, you see taxes and you see the number there. And every April 15th, is a deadline of filling out some paperwork where you actually see how much of a hit you're taking. And they also run the scam where they skim it off the top, and then they encourage you to not owe money at the end of the time. You don't want to owe money you can't pay. And so they typically, if you're in the middle class or lower class, you get money back. And so the early January, February, March, if you file early, or April, May if you file late, it's like Christmas time, right? It's like you take the hit for Christmas where you spend all this money, and then you get your tax refund, and you use it for a winter vacation or something. And it seems like the government's giving you money, and you forget that it's your money that it's giving back to you, because they've taken it from you early in the year, when you could have been earning interest on it, could have been using it for something you needed then. So taxes, why do people pay taxes? How many people would pay taxes, and how much would they pay if it was a voluntary system? I'll ask that question. Like nobody would pay?
No.
People give money to charity.
Get tax breaks for charity, that.
Well, but you don't get so you get a break for taxes, but you don't get the whole amount back. You just you lower your rate. Some people even give money to politicians that they can't deduct from their taxes. Probably less though. You think you probably get fewer government services too, right? Because you wouldn't have the money for it. So why do people pay taxes? Well, it's because if you don't, you get a big fine. If you don't pay the fine, you have your bank account frozen. If you still don't pay, you can go to prison. So, so you think about under what conditions is it legitimate to use violence? Think in general, about using violence or threat and violence. And just think about as an ordinary person, suppose I own a firearm. Under what conditions would it be permissible for me to take it out, point it at someone, and demand something of them? Say, demand money. Right? If I do that as a private citizen, it's called armed robbery. If I point a gun at somebody and say, your money or your life, that's a crime. It seems like what would be a legitimate use of a firearm? If I have a gun.
Someone else was trying to kill you.
Yeah, like self-defense. There was actually a little altercation in the Texas state legislature. There was a group of illegal immigrants. Some of them legal, some illegal. Some had signs that said, "I'm an illegal immigrant. I'm here to stay." So some of them were self-professed illegal immigrants, and a Texas state representative came into the chambers. They're disrupting the legislative session, doing a big protest. And one of the guys comes in and says, "I'm glad I just called ICE." So he called Immigration Customs and Immigration Customs Enforcement. So they're like the organization that enforces immigration laws. He's like, I got a bunch of people disrupting our legislature, and they say they're illegal aliens. I just called ICE. He thought it was hilarious, or maybe he was mad. I don't remember what it was. And one of the other guys threatened him and said he was going to get him, and he had to leave sometime, and he was going to wait for him to leave, and he was going to get him, right? And the idea is threatening to beat the guy up. And the guy said, well, if you do, I'm going to put a bullet in your head, right? So the idea is that if someone comes at you and they're going to try to beat you up, they're trying to assault you, you can pull out a gun and shoot back. You can defend yourself, defend your health or your life. So when it seems like when you're thinking about taxes and you're depriving a person of the fruit of their labor, to do that through coercion and violence, does that seem like it would be justifiable? Now, here's the argument. Well, if you didn't do that, then we wouldn't have, say, an army. If we didn't have an army, then we could be invaded by another country. Or if there weren't police, you wouldn't have any property rights, and people would be, breaking the windows out of your storefront and stealing all your stuff, right? So the idea is the government is there to safeguard property rights. And even though it's bad that they're taking money from you by force, it's for a good purpose. It's to defend you, to keep you safe. That seems like you can. This is actually John Locke makes this argument in his second treatise on government. But is that what most of your tax dollars are being used for? Public safety. Maybe the military is like 20%. But is how much of that is homeland defense versus foreign adventurism and causing trouble in other countries? You look at like police resources. It's a little. Public safety is usually a small amount of total government spending. Certainly the federal government. FBI is like domestic law enforcement is really small. Smaller communities tend to be a little more. So then you think about, is it really keeping you safe and safeguarding your rights? And then if the government is taking, like, say if you're a middle class person, maybe a third of everything you own. If you're maybe upper middle class, maybe it's half. If you're upper class, maybe it's more than half. All of a sudden, this idea of somebody coming in and taking your stuff, you're like, well, wait a minute, the government's taking my stuff. They're taking more than the robbers were. I'll get a gun and defend my own store. So if you think about this from a moral point of view, it raises questions about the legitimacy of a government that's taken half of everything you earn in order to protect you and supposedly safeguard your property rights. And you think about all the things government spends money on. You think, okay, maybe police and roads and bridges and all that stuff, and parks, okay, college education, sure. But, like studying like bat guano as fertilizer. You can read like these sites that show like worthless government projects. I can't think of, anybody read anything outrageous recently about some study the government was funding that seemed frivolous or ridiculous? I've been caught up in this budget thing. I usually keep up on these things. You see the most ridiculous things the government spends money on. It would make your head spin. I'll see if I can post a list. So you look at what government doesn't spend money on roads and bridges and police. It spends it on lots of other things, including transfer payments to people that aren't doing as well. And forced charity. Let me ask this question. So what? It seems like if I see someone in need and give to them out of goodness of my heart, that seems like that's noble, right? It's charity. It's laudable, unless maybe you're Ayn Rand or something. But most people would say that's a laudable act if I help out my neighbor. But what if I come to your house and I steal some stuff out of your garage and then I sell it off and then I give money to my neighbor? That's called theft, right? Well, that's essentially what the government's doing, is they're taking your stuff through force of violence, and then they're giving it to somebody else that they say deserves it more or needs it more. So you think about taxes are extorted from peaceable people through violence and the threat of violence. It seems like you'd only be morally justified in levying them under the most extraordinary circumstances. So basically to protect people's life, liberty, and property. And everything else should be left to, private individuals. And so that's an argument why you should keep taxes low and again, equally proportioned, right? If they're not equally proportioned, that means me and my voting bloc, we can vote ourselves money from some other guy who's making more money than me, right? So we're going to band together and say, we're the 99%. And we'll go march and have a bunch of signs, and we'll pressure some legislators, maybe grease their palms with a little bit of money, and then we'll get some new tax passed, say. Example of extreme circumstances. So when could you use violence to take money from people? Well, again, if we're invaded by another country, that would be bad, right? All your rights would go out the window. So that might be a legitimate use, although perhaps not 20% of the economy. Definitely not foreign wars for, what's the phrase they use? There's a not global security, stability, for international stability, right? So, and usually what happens is things get a lot more unstable once the United States gets involved. Public safety, again, not like, as public safety, you build a house and your baseboard is a 1/4 inch bigger than it should be, or you don't have like a lighted exit sign. There's lots of things that you can be hit for public safety that don't have much use for as far as safety goes. And then, having so basically crimes like murder, rape, robbery, assault, right? Maybe drunk driving. And then having a courts as a place to solve your disputes. It makes sense, right? So it's not gonna be the Hatfields and the McCoys. People aren't, duking out in the streets or shooting each other. So you both go to an arbiter and have your dispute settled. And all those things seem to make sense. And it seems like you might even justify stealing people's money to support these kind of structures. Let's see. Let me just stop here since we're a little long time. Comments or questions so far? Disputations. We cover a lot of ground here. Anybody need to sign the roll sheet? I see it up here. Well, let me hit another couple of things. I'll have more time next time too for discussion. I'm hitting a lot of stuff here. So what's the difference between like capitalism and socialism? When a capitalist society, individuals produce goods and services and offer them to you on a voluntary basis. So you buy a pair of shoes, right? Frederick Bastiat has this great thing. He's a great economist and philosopher, and he says, that basically the socialists say that we're against shoes because the government we don't want the government to make them, right? So this is the idea that if you're against, say, education, you think education should be done privately. You oppose government education. Are you really against education? Or are you against government education? And in a purely capitalist society, individuals working together to common purpose would be producing goods and services, and you would have to pay. You wouldn't have to pay. You'd get to pick what you want to buy. In government, in a socialist system, the government takes your money, sometimes all of it, and then gives you goods and services like foreign wars, war on drugs, studies on bat guano, or whatever that you may not want or need. And a lot of the money goes towards complying with government rules and regulations, and then also your money's doled out to other people that are thought to need it more than you do. So and again, this is the voluntary versus the involuntary. Imagine like someone, suppose someone knocks on your door and they say, "Hey, I just painted your curb there," and they hand you a bill for like $100, and you say, "Well, I'm a renter. I'm not even a homeowner. I don't get very visitors, and I don't really care about the curb." And they're like, "But look at the good job I did," and you look at it, and it's kind of crappy. It's like painted like freehand, and maybe they got one of the numbers wrong. Right? And they say, that'll be $100. And you go, well, I'm not going to pay that. And then they say, well, if you don't pay it, we're going to come and burn your house down, right? Or whatever, right? They threaten you. And you think, well, that seems like it's morally wrong because you didn't ask your curb to be painted. They did a crappy job, and so you'd have a right not to pay that. But the government gives you all these services that you may not want or need. Some of you might want. But even if the guy did a great job, and even if he offered a fair price, you still might say, well, out of principle, I'm not going to pay this because you did it without asking. But this is kind of government policy. It does all sorts of things for you that you might not want it to, and you don't get any choice in the matter. In capitalism, individuals own the means of production, and how do you own the means of production? Well, you work for a living, save up some money, get a loan based on your good character. You look at all the entrepreneurs, and they either convince other people to give them their money, or they max out a bunch of credit cards, or they save up some money, or maybe their dad floats them a loan. Occasionally they'll have some inheritance, but usually it's people that start small businesses are either really good at presenting something to investors that they're willing to buy into. They got a great idea, a new invention. They got to do something on the front end, and then they start their business. And then the idea in a capitalist system, which is really the lack of a system, there's free exchange of goods and services. So you can buy, sell, trade, or invest as you see fit. Let's see what we got here. So a lot of people confuse capitalism with the crony capitalism, which is actually another name for socialism or fascism. So in crony capitalism, it's all based on lobbyists, subsidies, regulations that screw foreign or domestic competitors.
So us.
What's that?
So America.
Largely America. There's some places where it's worse. I think Latin America, things tend to be more corrupt. Maybe things are less corrupt in, try to find some country, maybe Hong Kong or something. Maybe Chile, things are a little less corrupt. But you get, basically you're a big corporation, you get a lobbyist, they make a political contribution to your congressman or senator for their next election, and then you get them to pass some regulation that's preferential treatment to your business. Or you get a big fat agriculture subsidy, and you're like, hey, we're growing sugar beets here, we're trying to sell sugar, and we got these people over in Brazil, they got all this sugar cane, they're trying to flood the market with cheap sugar, and it's driving down prices. And by God, we're an American company and we deserve protection. Right? So you get a regulation passed. You get a big tax slapped on sugar imports. And all of a sudden, sugar beets are through the roof. So that's the kind of crony capitalism or crapitalism. I like to say crony capitalism is phony capitalism. It's not true capitalism. And then when you have tax food subsidies, preferential treatment, and there's this revolving door between the regulators and the business people. So like who's at the Department of Agriculture? Well, people that used to work for agribusiness, people from Monsanto and Arthur Daniels Midland, and who's who are the insurance regulations or regulators? Well, they're people that used to work in the insurance business, right? So you get this revolving door, and it's extremely corrupt. But the only reason the government has power at all, or sorry, the corporations have power at all, is they collude with the government to screw you, the consumer. Right? If you couldn't bribe a congressman to pass a special regulation, then you'd have to compete in a fair and open market against the other businesses. So it's government power of the economy which actually empowers corporations to screw you, the individual consumer. Okay, we'll finish up capitalism and socialism, go through some of the readings on Thursday and do some review and talk a little bit about healthcare.